Good morning. My apologies to those of you who've already heard me drone on for 15 minutes this morning. Now you get to hear me drone on some more. But Father Edward asked me to talk about this is too tall for me, my story of calling. So I apologize if you've heard this before. It hasn't changed, but we'll give it a go. So everyone's journey to the priesthood is unique. And I've met a few people who have known their whole lives that this is their direction, even though, like from early childhood, even when there are some twists and turns before they reach ordination. And your typical seminary student these days is more likely to be either someone in his or her late 20s, early 30s, who has had some early career experience, maybe related to the church, and who have then discerned a call, or those who may have had a full career as a teacher or a lawyer, a physician, and then discerned a call perhaps in their 40s, or even 50s or 60s. And at Nashotah House last year, the youngest student was 23, and the oldest residential student was 67, was not me, and there were doctoral students in their 70s. So clearly we're never too young or too old to be called by God. And although I can say that my ability to read and retain huge swaths of material was better in my 20s, much better, it's still possible to get through it even later in life. So I grew up in Pasadena, California, a cradle Episcopalian, the daughter of two cradle Episcopalians, and I was baptized and attended church in the same church where my mother was baptized, where my parents were married, where my father's funeral was held. We went to church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school. I played all those pivotal parts in the Christmas pageant. And I was confirmed. I served as an acolyte. And there was something about being an acolyte that I loved. I loved being up, and back then the altar was way the heck at one end of the church, facing away from everybody, and I loved being up there by that altar, and I guess I should have paid more attention to that, but I didn't. My father's great uncle had been the Bishop of New Jersey, and his great aunt had founded an order of Episcopal nuns, which is still in existence today, the Order of the Transfiguration, just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And both my father and his father had attended St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire, and until I started attending there in the mid-70s, it had only gone co-ed just a year or two before I got there. So it had been all boys. I was one of the first. In my 9th grade class, there were 93 students, and only 9 of us were girls. Chrissy came the next year. It was a little bit better. It was a little better. So it seems that I have these deep Episcopal roots, and I do, but that does not equate with deep spiritual knowledge, because, as you will find with many Episcopalians, that even as an adult, my knowledge of the Bible was scant. And much of what I did know came from 3 sources: Jesus Christ Superstar, Godspell, and for the Old Testament background, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I did tell my parish discernment committee about that. They knew. But long story short, I was a good Episcopalian, but I wasn't what you would call a devout Christian. And no one would have predicted that I would end up as a priest. I would have predicted that I was going to be a vet or some kind of wildlife ranger, or maybe a doctor. I always had a million strange animals in the house that made my mother crazy. I loved children. I always pictured myself surrounded by lots of both of those things. And I worked at the Los Angeles Zoo as an intern. I loved every minute of it. And, but I knew in my heart I wasn't gonna make it through med school or vet school, because that didn't really concern me, because I knew that once I got to college, I would figure it all out. You go to college, someone's gonna tell you what you need to be when you grow up. And so I went to school in California and majored in the lucrative subjects of American Studies and psychology. And 2 majors that make parents roll their eyes these days when they think of job potential, but people just didn't worry about it all that much. You went to college to discover yourself. And all the Career Center had, both at both of my undergraduate schools, was all the really you went there for was to sign up for graduate exams, the graduate record exam or the GMAT, because what you need is more college after you go to college. And I was pretty good at college, so I stayed. And I became a graduate student. And instead of figuring out what type of career I was called to, I went with what I was good at. So I was good at taking classes and writing papers. And it turns out, though, that in graduate school, it's a little bit of a different population, and some of these people are really passionate about what they're studying. And they really want to dive deep into these specific areas. And I had none of that. I was just biding my time, waiting for something to sort of fall out and tell me what to do. So I was at William & Mary studying American Studies, and one day I saw an ad for an internship in the admissions office. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. Maybe I'll do that. And so I took the internship, and that led to a more permanent position at Georgetown University, and I moved up to DC. And this seemed like a great career path, except that when you're in admissions, you travel a lot. And I had never been in the situation where you wake up in a different Holiday Inn every day and you don't even know what town you're in. And so that, after a while, after weeks and weeks of that, it gets a little tiring. And you also are supposed to be selling things. You're supposed to be an extrovert. And I am neither of those things. So after a while, I moved on, went to George Washington University and got a different master's degree in hospital administration, because remember, I liked all that medical stuff, but I thought this would be good. This is for like the humanities person that kind of wants to be in a hospital. And so I did that. I got that hospital administration degree. I ended up in New Hampshire working at a little country hospital, and I met my husband, and we started a business together. We started a family, and along the way, I learned a lot of things. I learned how to manage people and payroll and clients, and we grew our company. It grew from just us two to where we had 21 employees. We were in 6 different states. I was active in my church. I was president of the PTO. I was doing stuff. Like, this was great. I was doing what I was meant to do. And we had a little farm, and I had tons of animals, so that was great also. And before I knew it, 15 years had gone by, and I still didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And what I did know is that New Hampshire is really cold, and I'm originally from a warm place. So we moved to Florida, and back to and we moved here with the 4 kids, and I sort of thought, well, I'll just be a mom, this will be great. And my husband said, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, what do you mean, what am I going to do? And he said, well, you know how to do college admissions, maybe you should go back and do that again. So I ended up sort of on the other side of the desk, helping high school students with their college admissions process. And I had a little consulting company, and that was all fine and good. But I just grew more and more restless. Not unhappy, but just restless, thinking that life was passing me by and I was not going to have fulfilled God's purpose. And I noticed that God was now in the picture. And I knew I was searching for something, and I didn't have any clue about what that was. And St. Augustine writes about, in his Confessions, he writes this letter to God saying, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. And I wish I had known about St. Augustine at that point in my life, because it would have answered a whole lot of questions and probably moved me along a little more quickly. And I had been going to church on and off, certainly holidays, my kids were baptized, I was active as a volunteer, but I was still, again, wasn't religious. And then there were these tiny little twists of fate that started leading me in a new direction. And I started wondering if God was going to be able to help me out with this. Like, maybe he's going to tell me what I'm called to do. And on Palm Sunday in 2017, I was out visiting my mother. She lives in Santa Barbara now. And we're sitting in church together, and there's a woman is preaching, and this voice, and if you just heard me preach, I hear voices, but only twice. This voice says to me, you need to do that. And I look at my mom, and I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And she looks at me like, I didn't say anything. So I just sort of said, okay, that was weird, and I ignored it. And then that same voice kept saying to me, you need to do that, and more persistent, and it wouldn't go away, and I thought there's a chance I'm like losing it here. So I started researching, well, what would work? And I like to plan things out. So I said, okay, I think I might want to be ordained. I worked in hospitals before. I will be a chaplain. This will be great. I'm sure this will be an easy thing to do. And then I start researching everything you need to do to be a chaplain. Well, you have to go to seminary. So I said, okay, I can go to seminary, no problem. I've been to school before. But there's other things you have to do. You have to be ordained, and I didn't know how to do that, and I researched it, and all of this ends me up in Father Edward's office, where I'm saying I heard this voice, and I don't know what to do, and just tell me to be on altar guild, and let's call it a day. And that is not what he told me to do. He told me to pray about it, and I did, and then he taught me about all the different steps it would take and sort of set me on my path to what I needed to do to go through all the hoops that you have to jump through. And every step, I wanted to stop, saying, like, this isn't my idea, this isn't my plan, this is certainly not my husband's plan. I told this to him, and he said, okay, in a few weeks, you'll be over this. And that never really happened. My closest friends thought I was nuts for all kinds of reasons. I was too old. I was quitting a very good job that I'd had for 10 years. What about retirement? What about I'm going to learn Hebrew? Like, really, you're going to do that? And they also pointed out to me the fact that I have never, ever mentioned wanting to do this in my life. But that's where I sort of realized that becoming a priest was not something I chose. It just wasn't, it's just something that I was called to. So that was sort of the big difference between the priesthood and other parts of my life. So my husband is the very opposite of this. Because I always have a plan, he never has a plan. But he also never gives up. So when things don't go according to my plan, I go to the next plan. He says, no, when we start something, we finish it. And when we started our business, I said, this is dumb, we're not gonna get any clients. I always wanted to throw in the towel, and he said, that's not an option, that we are doing this no matter what happens. And then if you've I'm not gonna give this, I'm taking this part out, because this is the part I'm gonna talk about in my sermon. So if you haven't heard my sermon yet, you have to come to church. But every time I wanted to quit, I would say, what else am I going to do? Am I going to sit on the beach? Am I going to go back to my old job? What am I going to, what could I think of? Knitting? I don't know. And there was nothing else for me to do. And I still think that even on days when I come home and I'm discouraged about something, as soon as I've sort of given myself over to this, there's no other option. It's a little creepy then how things started to fall into place. So that's when you learn that God has this plan, and when we finally get out of our own way, things really start zipping along. And meetings that I needed to attend at the diocese, there would be one meeting a year, and the meeting was next week, and oh, look, you can go, or it's tomorrow. Oh, okay, I can get there. So day after day, and course after course, and exam after exam, one foot after the other, I did things like Curcio, and Nicholas and I took Catechesis of the Good Shepherd together. I read, if you were here during COVID, I read the prayers of the people for months and months and months online when it was just 3 of us in the church. I filled those little glasses with wine and then washed those little glasses while we all slogged through COVID. And before I knew it, it was time to go off to seminary, which was the most amazing and also the hardest year of my life. First of all, I was back in the cold, which is a bummer. But it was only 1 year for that. But it's far from my family. But I had a new family. And yes, I had to learn Greek and Hebrew, but everybody else had to learn them too. So we're all in it together, getting that done. And I remember I mentioned how in graduate school there are people who are super passionate. Like, seminary is those passionate people on steroids. Like, they read these books with the dust falling off of them until 4 in the morning. And I hadn't studied it, and they've studied all this as undergraduates, a lot of them. I had done none of that. I had been ask me about American studies, and we're good. But that just doesn't end up being as important as you think it will be. And you still get through, and somehow, I'm not sure exactly how I made it through. And then the next thing I know, I'm lying on the floor of a church, and a bishop is laying hands on me, and you expect to feel relieved, like, okay, I've done it. But it's not really a relief because now people expect you to know things. um, and also, if you notice, there's that time in church, if you're at an ordination, at a priestly ordination, where all the other priests from all around, they all lay their hands on each other, and it ends up on you, and you feel this tremendous pressure and weight. And I remember the bishop saying, don't push her over. You know, they warned them, like, don't lean all your weight on her. But it's a weight that goes to your very core, and you realize that this is this important thing that you're doing, and you hope you can live up to it. So it wasn't really a relief, but I'm also, and that's the other reason I shouldn't be a priest, I'm really, really bad with names. That's my other thing. Like, you can't call me to be a priest. I can't remember anyone's name. But I know that God has a purpose and a plan for me, and I know it's not my job to figure that out. It's just my job to do it. And they ask you this all the time in seminary about, like, where are you going? What are you going to do after this? Where are you going to be? And this is the same when you're in college. It's the same when you make a lot of life choices. People say, you know, what are you doing next? And I never had a concrete answer to that throughout this entire process. People would say, do you want to be a parish priest? What kind of, what else do you want to go off and do? And all I say, and I still say it, is that God got me into this, and God is getting me through it. And so I just don't really worry about it that much. And that does drive my husband a little crazy when he says, what are you doing next? I'm like, I don't know, but it's going to work out. It's worked out so far. I just have to trust in the process. And so I wish I had done all this a little sooner, I think. I think that would have, if that's any regret that I have in going this, this far, this late. But I don't know that it would have worked out the same way. I wasn't in control of it. So that's sort of what ended me up here in this place with these people doing this work. And I hope that this is where God wants me to be. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, Jan. How did we choose Naples, Florida? My in-laws were wintering in Naples, and we came down for their 50th anniversary one year in January. And I said, look at this is pretty nice. And I also made when we sold our business in 2006, and he said where we could move, because our kids were at a perfect age to move them. And I said, I want to go back where the sun sets into the ocean. And so I kind of got tricked, but I'm pretty happy that so I thought California, there's no way he was moving to California. So we ended up living next door to my in-laws, which was super fun. Yes? Yeah, I'd say 98% of the time I'm happy. There's sometimes it's just exhausting, or I mess up a lot. So you mess something up and you feel dumb, and you're like, I could be sitting on a beach right now reading a book without any pressure to do anything right. But that's really, nobody's perfect. That's what I like, only God is perfect. So, but yes, I am happy, yeah. Nothing, crickets. Yes?
You are still relatively early in your career as a priest, and from our perspective, making great progress with it. That's why. What are your big challenges in being the kind of priest that you want to be?
What worried me along the way always was that I'm not this warm and fuzzy person, and that's what when my friends were, and Chrissy knows, my friends Miranda and Katie were, and Katie, Akuzi, who was like, they were like, you aren't nice enough to be a priest. But then people said, well, maybe maybe God sees a plan for somebody that's not like the super warm and fuzzy person. And I try not to be mean, so I hope. Let me know if I was mean to you. But I think that's what I find, was like my biggest question, like, is my personality suited to this? Yes. Yes, so my husband is, he is in real estate now. He started life as a floor broker in New York. And so is always sort of, we are just opposites in so many ways. It's funny that we've been together for 32 years because there's just ways that he's always like looking for the buy low, buy low, sell high deal and everything. And I'm like, no, and that was our problem with our business. I'm like, just let them have it. Just pay them more. It's okay. And he'd be like, no. But he's also Jewish, my husband, but not devoutly Jewish. So the fact that I can make good challah bread and latkes pretty much makes him happy. And we raised our children sort of both for a while until I just said, my husband really was not too into any of it. And I said, yeah, they're just going to be Episcopalian now because you're not really taking part in this. But he is very patient, extremely patient, and supportive. And you won't see him here. Well, you did see him here. He was the Easter Bunny, which that's a very hot suit, just so you know. So he'll be there in a pinch, but you will never see him on his knees, is my guess. But he's coming along slowly. And I did tell him that when he stood up at our children's baptisms, and he renounced Satan, that actually he became an Episcopalian. So he's getting there. Yes. So the 4 kids, my youngest is Adam, is 22. He is at Northeastern University in Boston. And I have twins, Anna and Oliver. And Oliver is here with us in Naples, and he works at Artist Naples. You'll see him in the box office. And his sister Anna works for the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. And my oldest daughter, Elizabeth, lives here in Naples and just had a baby boy, Henry, and who will be getting baptized here as soon as he gets his first COVID vaccine. So in a few months, he'll be back here getting baptized. Yeah.
What have you found to be the toughest part of being a priest?
That's a good question. I think that initially, like just the nuts and bolts of keeping everything straight and what are you doing, but now that's kind of, ironing itself out. I haven't had to do a lot of the really hard stuff. When I did my chaplaincy training, when I worked at the hospital, I was with a lot of people who were dying. I haven't had to do that as a priest yet. But I think I don't know. None of it's just not messing up. I'm a perfectionist, and it's hard. And I work for a perfectionist, so. So he makes me a little nervous, but none of it's terrible. Easter is really hard. Easter is exhausting, people. Can I just tell you? Easter's exhausting. But then you recover. Yeah.
So I grew up Catholic, so all of our priests were male. And I've been going here 20 years, and I'm always so impressed by our female priests. But I wonder, are there any challenges that you have as a female priest?
Not here, but I attended a seminary where a good portion and the faculty would never tell you, but we sussed out the faculty that did not believe in women's ordination, and at least 50% of the students, because they're in the Anglican Church of North America, not the Episcopal Church, they also did not believe in women's ordination. So you found yourself defending that a lot, theologically, and just over lunch, and just like, don't be such a jerk kind of a thing. And the fact that it's been 50 years. That was the hardest part of seminary, for sure, was having people that didn't believe, because if you don't believe in women's ordination, then you don't believe my call is real. And then if my call isn't real, what is it? And that just that really hurt. So you don't get, people now are surprised if you say, yeah, there's people that don't believe in women's ordination. They're like, what? But there are, and it was good experience to learn to deal with that, I think, But that was definitely the hardest part of seminary, for sure. Yeah.
Show the house where you be in your parish.
Well, you tell me. I don't, they, no, they work really, really hard on all of those things, on liturgics, on all the aspects of pastoral care. You have, they tell you that some seminaries don't have all that training, and I don't know what you would. It seems like it would be really, really hard to go to a parish without it. But they do I think, an excellent job of preparing you. You're in a parish, so you're getting something different from chapel. You're in chapel twice a day. There's the Eucharist every single day. You're seeing, talk about bells and smells and smoke and all of that, and the whole pastoral care parts of it as well. I think they do a great job.
What do you find to be the thing you like the best, or the thing that's the most fun about being a priest?
I love celebrating. I love preaching. I love the preaching part. The writing part is not always awesome, but I love both of those things. Father Edward, when I first came to him and he said, well, how do you feel around the altar? Do you feel drawn to the altar? Because you kind of have to decide if you're called to be a deacon or a priest, because there's not a huge difference in those two things except for the celebrating. And so the fact that I felt called to the altar, and now that that's being sort of fulfilled within me, I think that's my favorite part. I thought the collar would be really cool. It's like wearing braces. It's fun for like a week. Then it's just hot. So a deacon can do everything a priest can do except for blessings and celebrate the Eucharist and absolution of sin. So you can marry, you can bury. I mean, there's different permission things with a bishop depending where you are. But so a deacon can do all of those things, but a deacon is called to have one foot in the community and one foot in the church. There's sort of this bridge between the two, and I think that's why they always make sure that you're a deacon for 6 months, at least 6 months, a transitional deacon when you're on track to becoming a priest, so that you get that feeling. But a deacon generally feels called to be a bridge between the community and the church, as opposed to being the person who's celebrating. Mm-hmm. It depends on your parish, I think. You would be, I don't know, Edward, help me out. What is a deacon if you had a full-time deacon?
In churches that have a deacon who's called to that ministry, usually they're engaged in some sort of outreach to the community. So there is a deacon up in Venice who is very called to be present with, I think it's a homeless shelter. So they're almost every single day, and that's really what his ministry is. And then he comes into the church on Sundays and he reads the gospel and he's there. But everybody, when they look at him, they see that's a holy presence out in the community at this homeless shelter. So that's the big difference. Priests are going to be equipping you all to go out into the world. Deacons are out there with you. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. An archdeacon is just the chief deacon in the diocese. So there'll be one deacon in charge of all the other deacons. But that title can move around. Anything else?
What's the level of education difference between the deacon and the priest?
Oh, so depending on your diocese, a deacon is less training for a deacon. They're different. Some dioceses have their own training programs. I think ours goes through a program that's at a seminary where they've made sort of a national curriculum. So it's shorter. I think it was like before they went to the new curriculum, it was like 18 months where you went on Saturdays. But they still write a lot of paper. It's still very rigorous. They have to take deacon exams instead of general ordination exams, which are set up by the diocese instead of the national board. So it's a little bit less onerous, but not, it's still a thing. Yes?
When you were in seminary, did you feel like, was my
Oh, yeah. Because I think because you're in community with all these people who are doing the same thing and you're all praying together, so you spend so much time in prayer with these people. You go on retreat with these people, and you talk about your faith a lot because you question your faith a lot. I would like yell out across the library. It's 1 a.m. I'm like, what are we doing here? And then someone else will yell back, you're called. So, but it definitely deepens your faith and grounds your faith, and because it's kind of what you're thinking about most of the time. I didn't have to worry about what I was feeding my family. I didn't have to go to the dry cleaner. I didn't have to deal with any of that. I was just focused on what I was doing there. Well, thank you very much.